all. This is really fascinating to me, because I wonder how otherwise decent and rational human beings, which I believe almost all of those in that survey to be, could look at the same set of social facts, the same social reality, and see something that is not only so different from what people of color saw, but so utterly wrong in every possible way. You see, it isn't even arguable that that was wrong, and yet that's what the vast majority, overwhelming majority of white America believed to be true. So objective fact isn't enough, you see, because the dominant group, for reasons that we need to think about, has never been able to see the truth. Or maybe they're able to, but have chosen not to. It's not just in the 60s. You can go back to the 1890s. Read some of the newspapers, not only Southern newspapers, but perhaps especially Southern newspapers during the era of the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, when white supremacy was really being reestablished with a vengeance, right? After emancipation, long after that, long after those initial civil rights laws had been passed under Reconstruction. Now white supremacy reasserting itself, and you will see those papers, editors writing about how, well, we get along just fine with our Negroes down here if those Yankees would just leave us alone. They didn't ask any of the black folks in the community how they felt about that, but the white folks who printed the papers were convinced everything was fine in the 1890s. Once again, in retrospect, we look back and go, my goodness, how could they be so silly? And yet that's what they thought. They weren't just blowing smoke. They really believed that. Go back to the 1850s. Now we're talking about a period of enslavement. Now we're talking about a period where a bunch of land just got taken from Mexico, right? In a war that we lie about in middle school and high school and act like they started it. Not actually the way things went down. So we've just taken a bunch of land. We've been taking native land. We're still enslaving black folks. Samuel Cartwright, a well-respected physician of his period, right? Southern physician. Dr. Samuel Cartwright in the 1850s decides that not only is the oppression of African peoples not a problem, not only is racism, which word doesn't even exist yet, not a problem, but in fact, black folks who don't understand how good they have it under the system of enslavement are actually mentally ill. And so he concocts a medical diagnosis which finds its way not only into his own teachings, but into the textbooks of medical schools during this period, a term that he uses to name the mental illness that afflicts black folks who choose to run away, who don't understand how good they have it. He calls it drapetomania. I really don't know what the Latin root of this is. I don't know how he came up with this title, but drapetomania is what he says is the mental illness that explains why some black folks run away from their loving masters. And this is not just Dr. Samuel Cartwright's theory. This becomes a taught and respected medical theory, scientific theory, to explain why black folks just don't want to stay on the plantation. Which is why when emancipation came, right, a lot of Southern plantation owners, go back and read some of the journals or the things that they said on the floor of their state legislatures under the Confederacy. It's fascinating to watch these men get up on the floor and say, my God, they're leaving the farms in droves. Why would they do this? We always thought they were family, right? Why would they leave? We always thought they were our best friends. And no one seems to understand because, once again, the dominant group, not because they don't have the brain power to know truth, they do. Not because they aren't rational enough to know truth, they are. Not because they're even particularly indecent people. They might be very kind and loving people to, old folks, animals, and small children. But in this particular instance, you have these rational sort of possessors of all this wealth and power who cannot understand that the world that they see is not the world as it is lived and experienced by millions of their fellow countrymen and women. So when we are asking, does race still matter? The question then is, how would we know? And the answer is, we better check in with those who were the targets. Because it isn't sufficient to just assume that we know something, It isn't sufficient to just look at the objective evidence, because apparently the objective evidence doesn't matter to some people. It never has. And so we have to check in with those who were the targets, because if we're being honest, and a lot of times we're not, we would have to acknowledge that they are the ones in the best position to know. While those of us in a dominant group who are not the targets of a system of subordination have the privilege of obliviousness.